I think I'm going to leave a minute. You watch, I'm going to leave a minute left. That's my birthday gift to the committee on your behalf. We have three more bills. I want to remind everybody that it's been a decade since this committee has passed bipartisan legislation or any legislation outside of a partisan budget resolution. I think that's should be the new norm here, and I know you will carry that tradition on one day, hopefully not anytime soon. So we're going to add to the first three, the Fiscal State of the Union, the Fiscal Commission, by adding Preventive Health Savings Act, H.R. 766, introduced by Dr. Michael Burgess, chair of our Healthcare Task Force, supported by Representative Diana DeGette of Colorado. And we'll have more to say about this bill. Suffice it to say, healthcare is a tremendous cost to the taxpayer. It is almost a third in its entirety of the federal budget and growing. I mean, it's $1 trillion on Medicare alone. That will double over the next 10 years. And we've had 123% in the last decade growth in Medicaid. So when we look at these unique solutions, these healthcare innovations, there are times that they cost more on the front end, but yield savings along with better quality health outcomes in the 20 and 30-year time horizon. So I appreciate and applaud the leadership of Dr. Michael Burgess, who's been working on this for several years. Then we have 7032, the CBO Data Sharing Act. That is the ranking member's bill, which I support wholeheartedly, giving CBO the tools they need to deliver for us, their customer, timely and accurate information. That is common sense reform at its best. H.R. 5301, Eliminate Useless Reports Act. We study things to death around here. As a friend of mine said, when all is said and done in Washington, more is said than done. Well, more is studied than done as well. Let's get rid of some of the duplicative and useless reporting and studying, and let's get on with leading and making decisions for the American people. With that, Mr. Ranking Member, and a minute left.
That is amazing.
Happy birthday, and I yield as much time as you need.
Truly, this is a historic day. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Jody. I will share with you what I've told my staff, my wife, other friends of mine in private. I feel very fortunate that Jody Arrington is my partner on this committee. With obviously he is chair and me as ranking member. Ideally, those roles may flip after November, but either way, the working relationship, the true friendship I have with you, truly you're a class act, and feel very fortunate. And independently, we have very similar visions for this committee, kind of almost a twin track approach that on the one track, of course, we're going to have fights that are partisan in nature. We're coming from two different ideologies, respecting two great American political traditions, and we should have those fights vigorously and fairly. But that doesn't mean we can't also have progress on the other track, which is especially reflective of a time of divided government, identifying these ways in which we can fix a broken Washington and improve a broken budget process. So I'm very excited that one of the three bills we'll be marking up today is my bill, the Congressional Budget Office Data Sharing Act, the CBO Data Sharing Act. We spoke a great deal about it last week when we had the CBO director here. I am proud that the lead co-sponsor of this bill is Chairman Arrington. And what a statement it says, Mr. Chairman, because I just want to underscore this, that this is the first time in 10 years, I guess last committee when we passed out several bills, and now this hearing when, or excuse me, last week when we passed out several bills, and now this markup, we're passing out three more. It's a great credit to you, Mr. Chair, and to all of our members that we are marking up legislation and making this committee matter. There is a lot of good that we can do to pick up the pieces from work that was done before us but didn't get over the finish line. The commission on which you served in 2018 did a great deal of work. The bipartisan modernization of Congress committee also had unanimous suggestions that I think we can take up as well. So I'm excited to be doing this work with you, Mr. Chair. And finally, I will just say for the record, I am, yes, turning 47, which on Capitol Hill is like turning 17. So I thank you again for the birthday wishes, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and I certainly echo his sentiments on the good work of our committee as a team, and the continuation of the bipartisan common sense reforms to the budget process today. Now, I will recognize members for opening statements. We will delve into the three pieces of legislation with comments from those who are the authors of the legislation, but for now, I will yield 3 minutes to Dr. Michael Burgess from the state of Texas for 3 minutes of opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing these these bills to markup today. And one of them, of course, is H.R. 766, the Preventive Health Savings Act. I've worked on this bill since 2012. This legislation establishes a mechanism for the Congressional Budget Office to more accurately reflect the long-term cost-saving potential of preventive health care. It's a bipartisan, bicameral legislation. It encourages the use of data-informed preventive health measures. The bill is a responsible and life-saving approach that will ensure that the government calculates the savings for preventive health. Chronic diseases account for over 70% of all healthcare spending. This legislation will finally help bend the cost curve and provide a more accurate understanding of long-term cost savings from preventive health policies. Specifically, H.R. 766 allows the Congressional Budget Office, on instruction from Congress, to extend its analysis beyond the existing 10-year budget window to 2 additional 10-year periods to provide a fuller analysis of the potential budgetary savings and the impact of preventive health legislation. The Preventive Health Savings Act narrowly defines preventive health to refer to an action that focuses on the health of the public, individuals, and defined populations in order to protect, promote, and maintain health and wellness and prevent disease, disability, premature death that is demonstrated by credible and publicly available evidence from epidemiologic projection models, clinical trials, observational studies, longitudinal studies, and meta-analysis. This ensures that the legislation would target the review of evidence-based preventive health measures to ensure that to enable Congress to better evaluate meaningful and impactful policies. We passed Medicare Part D in 2003. What we found over this last decade was Medicare did not spend as much money as people projected that it would. And I would submit that part of the reason for that was the passage of Medicare Part D. It kicked in 2006, 2007, and by 2010, 2011, where the study was commenced, it did not cost as much to take care of people as was expected. This is evidence that timely treatment actually prevents more costly therapies in the future. Knowing that large laws like Medicare Part D can take years to have an effect, here's the deal. We all learned this at our mother's knee. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We are asking that CBO, which has only looked at the cost of the ounce of prevention, now give us the score for the pound of cure that is going to result. I thank members of this room for their support of the bill. Look forward to its passage in the committee and yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Texas for his leadership. I think this is a big deal. I think not having a one-size-fits-all model and considering the long-term implications on savings, among other great outcomes like quality health outcomes, will benefit this country for years to come. So thank you, Dr. Burgess. Now, I will recognize Jimmy Panetta, our friend from California, for 3 minutes of opening remarks.
Outstanding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Boyle. I want to again commend this committee for taking up this bipartisan work and these types of products, and for your focus on legislation that's really relevant to the budget process in this committee. I believe that even as we've had disputes, your work in a bipartisan fashion really has been a model of cooperation and an example of professionalism that's been brought to this committee and needs to be brought more to the United States Congress. So thank you for that. Now, I intend to support all three of the bipartisan bills before us today, and obviously want to thank the sponsors, including Ranking Member Boyle and Chair Arrington, for bringing these forward. The first bill, the Preventative Health Savings Act, addresses an issue in healthcare policy that often focuses us to make a short-sighted decisions, and that's a 10-year budget window. By looking at the impacts of health spending bills over a 30-year time period, instead, we can better understand that the taxpayer dollars, and it's a policy that will truly cost or save. The CBO Budget Sharing Act ensures that the CBO has all the data from other agencies that it needs to make decisions. As we heard from Director Swagel, the CBO can do a lot of good work, but doesn't always have all the information that it needs. The CBO can do a better job in serving Congress if its agencies are working in a truly collaborative fashion and getting CBO what it needs quickly. And lastly, the Eliminate Useless Reports Act, introduced by Mr. Grothman, our colleague, would reduce the time spent by bureaucrats on reports that have been done before or that no one really cares to read. Unfortunately, it's become a habit of Congress to require more reports in lieu of actual policymaking, and this is especially evident when it comes time to vote on amendments. But some of these reports are duplicative and unnecessary, and they have a hidden cost in the time spent preparing them. Requiring agencies to justify recurring reports will help us find duplicative and unnecessary studies and stop wasting those public servants' time. That time can better be spent actually working on behalf of our constituents. So I sincerely appreciate the work of the sponsors, the work of this committee on these common sense bills, and yes, their spirit of bipartisanship, and I look forward to supporting their passage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I associate myself again with my colleague and his comments, and I appreciate them. We have 3 minutes now to Mr. Grothman from Wisconsin for opening comments.
Thank you. Our national debt now stands at $34 trillion, more than $100,000 for every person. This is unconscionable. It's the result of decades of wasteful spending. Just this last weekend, Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, said the U.S. is, quote, the U.S. is on an unsustainable fiscal path. Powell went on to say the debt is growing faster than the economy, so it is unsustainable. I don't think that's at all controversial, and I think that we know that we have to get back on a sustainable fiscal path. And I think you're starting to hear now from people in the elected branches who can make that happen. I wholeheartedly agree with Chairman Powell's assessment and think it's time we take serious action to get our national debt under control. To illustrate how prolific the government is, let's take a look at how much of each year's spending was borrowed. In 2018, it was only 19 cents on the dollar to a certain extent because of supplementals. In 20 and 21, it was 48 and 40 cents on the dollar. But in 22, the year wrapped up, 22 cents. In 23, it's 28 cents. So it continues to go up. Obviously, that's not sustainable. The abysmal fiscal situation is a symptom of our country's broken budgeting process. This week's the first perfect example. Federal law requires the president to submit his budget request to Congress on the first Monday in February. This year, that deadline was yesterday, February 5th. Where's the president's budget? He hasn't submitted one yet. However, when the president delays, I am pleased the Budget Committee is hard at work considering these 3 bills to improve our broken process. First, H.R. 766, the Preventive Health Savings Act, from my buddy Congressman Burgess. This bill directs the Congressional Budget Office to more accurately reflect the long-term cost-saving potential of preventive health care initiatives. With many new and exciting healthcare innovations being developed, it's important CBO is the tools necessary to properly measure the effects of federal spending and revenue over time. The Congressional Budget Office Data Sharing Act from Congressmen Boyle and Harrington, and the Eliminate Useful Reports Act of 2023, myself and Congressman Garcia. I look forward to supporting these 3 bills and continue to work to improve our broken federal budgeting process and put our country back on the path to solvency, which I like to hang around here and see.
Amen. To my friend from Wisconsin, I too get choked up talking about eliminating unnecessary reports. This is a very emotional subject for all of us. I guarantee you, our taxpayers have a great deal of emotions when it comes to stewardship. Mr. Scott, our friend from Virginia, has some opening remarks as well. Sir, we yield 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Boyle. The Congressional Budget Office is critical support agency for our Congress. I appreciate that we often ask them for more than they're able to produce with the limited number of staff. Their work is necessary to ensure that the legislation we work on is fiscally responsible. They also help us ensure that the legislation does not do more harm than good. This is particularly important when we're looking at changing laws surrounding health care to account for the long-term cost curve. While these bills are helpful to CBO's mission, we must also be conscious of providing the resources they need through the appropriations process. Using short-term continuing resolutions to keep the government open costs more money and does not allow for agencies to plan ahead. Completing the regular appropriations process in a timely manner will allow for agencies to work more productively. Meanwhile, I look forward to improving the process at CBO with the passage of these 3 bills, and I want to thank members of the committee, Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member Boyle, Mr. Burgess, Mr. Grothman, for their leadership on these bills. These bills will allow CBO to provide more in-depth insight, shorten wait times, and lessen duplicate reporting. Look forward to the passage of the bills, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Virginia. We've had several members come in. If you'd like to make opening comments, general comments about the 3 bills, we will delve into each bill individually, but now this is just opening comments. I think Mr. Rudy Yakum from Indiana wants to make some comments. I yield 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad we're here today to consider these important bipartisan bills. 2 of the bills we're marking up today are essential to improving bill scoring by the Congressional Budget Office, also known as the CBO. We're also considering a bill that will reduce duplicative reporting by government agencies. As I mentioned during last week's hearing with Director Swagel, one of my concerns with the CBO is their methodology for scoring preventative health care legislation. Due to the CBO's 10-year scoring window, their scores often only reflect the higher upfront costs of preventative care without showing the long-term savings of such care. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the Preventative Health Savings Act, which is led by my colleague from Texas, Dr. Burgess. This bill allows the CBO to score preventative health care bills over a 30-year period. The longer scoring window will give us a more accurate view of long-term health savings of preventative health care measures and help us as legislators make more informed decisions. Additionally, I want to thank Chairman Arrington and Ranking Member Boyle, who I will note for the record is his birthday today, my fellow Notre Dame grad, for their leadership on the Congressional Budget Office Data Sharing Act, which will expand and clarify the CBO Director's authority to request and receive data from executive branch agencies. This will help the CBO overcome hurdles to obtaining data, which is vital to ensuring the timeliness and accuracy of their work. Lastly, I am grateful to my colleagues, Representatives Grothman and Garcia, for introducing the Eliminate Useless Reports Act, which will require federal agencies to eliminate outdated and non-essential reports from their annual budget justification. It's no secret that our bureaucracy has grown to an unnecessarily large size. This bill would be a good first step in reining in our bloated bureaucracy. I want to thank Chairman Arrington for bringing these important bills to the committee for markup today. I encourage my colleagues to support, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Indiana and yield 3 minutes to our friend, Mr. Bob Good from the mother of all states, Virginia.
The most historic of all states, as my friend to my right would attest to that effect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I'm glad that this committee is taking a more active role in passing bills that can have a positive impact on our budget process, and I thank the chairman for leading this effort. It's remarkable. There has not been a markup in this committee on legislation that was not part of the budget proposal in 10 years. Yesterday was the statutory deadline for President Biden's budget proposal, but here we are today, still waiting on him to release it. The bills being considered here today largely focus on the function and actions of the Congressional Budget Office, which is desperately needed. Since the beginning of this 118th Congress alone, our national debt has risen a staggering $2.5 trillion to $34 trillion. Never happened before in the history of the country outside of the COVID virus situation. So, and this shows no signs of slowing down thanks to the addiction to spending that permeates the uniparty in Congress. American families are suffering, however, with skyrocketing costs thanks to the $2 trillion in annual deficits, which, by the way, as we had a hearing on this subject last week, the CBO missed the projection by about $1 trillion on the $2 trillion deficit. This spending addiction does need to stop, and we need accurate cost estimates of legislation before we vote on it. There's a novel concept. We should know what something costs before we vote on it. The first step is to provide CBO with the tools and the authority to be able to accurately analyze the fiscal impact of legislation. Two of the bills being considered today do just that. The Preventive Health Savings Act will allow the CBO, upon request by Congress, to give a 30-year estimate of the impact that preventative health care legislation will have rather than the existing 10-year window. The CBO Data Sharing Act will grant CBO the authority to gain access to any relevant data from executive agencies that it requires to effectively conduct its analyses. I'm encouraged that this committee is taking action to get a better assessment of legislation by properly reforming the CBO. However, as this committee heard last week, the CBO is severely challenged in what it is asked to do. In 2020, CBO overestimated the deficit by $110 billion. In 21, CBO overestimated the deficit by $864 billion. In 2022, CBO overestimated the deficit by $194 billion. And then in 2023, as referenced just a moment ago, CBO underestimated the deficit by $1.041 trillion, over $1 trillion. With CBO missing the mark so dramatically, we should be taking a serious look at other methods for cost estimates of the policies that we vote on. And so, Mr. Chairman, I support the bills being considered here today, and I yield back.
Again, associate myself with the comments of my friend from Virginia. So you know it's going to be a good day when I'm associating myself with comments from colleagues on both sides of the aisle here. This is, again, a continuation of constructive bipartisan solutions to a broken budget process. I want to thank everybody for their opening comments. Now, if any other members would like to submit a written statement for the record, I will hold the record open until the end of the day to accommodate those members who may not have prepared written statements. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of H.R. 766, the Preventive Health Savings Act, which would provide Congress with supplementary information to better understand a policy's long-term impact on the federal budget. I ask unanimous consent that the first reading of the bill be dispensed with, the bill be considered as read and open to amendment at any point, that the reading of any amendments be dispensed with without objection, so ordered. The amendments considered by the committee will be those submitted pursuant to the agreement I made with the ranking member, Mr. Boyle. Are there any amendments? Mr. Burgess?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment, and we'll take a minute to distribute that amendment.
A manager's amendment offered by Representative Burgess.
Once everybody has a copy, we will, I'll defer 5 minutes to our colleague from Texas for comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The manager's amendment incorporates the following changes to the bill. This bill that was introduced by Representative Diana DeGette of Colorado and myself. These changes were developed by working in a bipartisan fashion and include improvements to the base bill developed in coordination with leadership and the chairs of the committees of jurisdiction over health care. It requires that requests for 30-year scores of preventive health care bills are made on a bipartisan basis, ensuring that these supplementary estimates are not used to justify partisan policies or create a new budget gimmick for additional spending. It requires the chair and ranking member of the Budget Committee to be included on the request, along with the chair and ranking member of the Committee of Primary Jurisdiction, protecting this committee's important jurisdiction over the Congressional Budget Office. It explicitly states that any estimate provided pursuant to the bill is solely a supplementary estimate and cannot be used to determine compliance with the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 or any other budgetary enforcement controls, protecting against manipulation of the process to create new budget gimmicks. It clarifies the definition of preventive health by inserting language to ensure that the measure will promote and increase access to innovative healthcare interventions, and they are eligible for a supplemental 30-year score. It does make technical changes to the language of the bill, incorporating feedback from the Congressional Budget Office. So, in short, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your work in helping me get this bill to the committee today. Again, I've waited for it for 12 years. I didn't know that this day would ever come, but it's an important step towards taking a smarter approach to how we look at preventive health care and preventive health care legislation in this Congress. And Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I also have a unanimous consent request for 3 letters, one from the Healthcare Leadership Council, one from the AMA, and one from, who are these people?
Really smart people and wise people who support this
Really
bill.
wise people. Oh, it's a collection of individuals who support the legislation.
Without
Ask these
objection,
be
so ordered.
included in
There's,
the record.
and for the record, there's so many people who support this, it's hard to even keep up with the list of supporters. I do thank you to my friend from Texas. Now yield 5 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Boyle.
Well, first, I want to congratulate our colleague on the committee, Dr. Burgess, and he will be missed, as I know this is his final term, and it's a great way to go out on top. I also want to recognize and congratulate our colleague, Diana DeGette, who Diana tells me that for 15 years, she's been fighting for this bill, and so it's a long time that she and Dr. Burgess have been partnering on this and fighting for it, and I'm glad to see it, that it will pass out of committee. I feel pretty confident in this prediction. I will congratulate both Dr. Burgess and Ms. DeGette in advance for this bill passing out of committee. It is a good piece of legislation, and not only this, but also building off the comments of Mr. Yocum, we do have to figure out ways to better accurately account for the sort of benefits we get very long-term from preventative health care. And certainly within a 10-year window, that does not fully capture some of the benefit. I remember when the chairman and I walked all of the members of the House through a bipartisan session, the CVC, about a year ago, or the beginning of last year. I noticed there was bipartisan support for moving in a direction such as the one I just outlined. So when we look at some of the things that are coming on market now, the revolution in anti-obesity drugs is just one example. There's a lot of long-term savings that we need to make sure are properly accounted for. So I'm happy to yield the remainder of my time to any of my Democratic colleagues, but seeing none, I will yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as base text for the purpose of amendment. So ordered. Now I have an amendment at the desk. The clerk will designate the amendment. The staff will distribute copies of the amendment. Clerk?
An amendment to change the short title offered by Chairman Arrington.
As it works its way around the committee room, I'd like to yield a couple minutes to myself for a few comments. These are very important. I'd like everybody to kind of look up and just listen to these very brief remarks about our colleague, Dr. Michael Burgess. This bill, is this where I get to do something really neat and special for my friend? Okay. So this bill, I think, is significant when we talk about process reforms. Nickels and dimes add up. I think having preventive and innovative solutions that cost tremendous amount to develop on the front end but yield great benefits long term could be a game changer, really, for the health of our country and our fellow citizens, but also for the fiscal health of our nation. And I know you've been working on this for you and Ms. DeGette for over 10 years now. And you've put 21 years into this institution. And you don't do it alone, like many of us who have families. Those families go on this journey with us. And they typically, our wives and our children, make the better part of the sacrifice. So on behalf of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and on behalf of your wife Laura and Christina, Jessica, and Mike, your children, we want to, and this amendment would change the name of this bill to the Dr. Michael C. Burgess Preventive Health Savings Act. No doubt, a great tribute to your legacy of service as a great Texan, the senior doctor in the House, the founder of the Doc Caucus, and a man who loves his country and desperately wants to see better and brighter days for his children and grandchildren. With that, I yield for any remarks to my ranking member.
Well, congratulations again, and just underscore what I said earlier, really great bipartisan work and happy to be strongly supportive. I yield back.
The question is on agreeing to the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. I now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, to discuss the bill as amended. I know you mentioned a number of things about the bill earlier, so feel free to summarize your remarks informally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just say one of my guiding principles that since I've been here is I don't like to name things after people who are still alive. But, today I could see it upside, so I'm going to suspend that principle for the duration of the committee. Well, again, I do want to thank you, Chairman, for your leadership on getting this markup done today. Thank members for support. I've already entered into the record the letters of support. I first introduced the Preventive Health Savings Act in 2012. During my time in Congress, I've seen so many pieces of legislation that have not been considered, legislation that would improve the health and well-being of many Americans because we could not see past the 10-year budget window. In fact, when I first got here, former Speaker Newt Gingrich told me in my first few months here that you've got to find some way to get out from under the tyranny of the Congressional Budget Office, because those are the very people who will tell you while you're flying on a 747 that it can't possibly take off. And I think that he was right in that estimate. You think about if we had a perfect cure for cigarette smoking in this country, even if it costs some dollars up front, what would the savings be like in the out years? And many of us would embrace that type of activity. Chronic diseases account for over 70% of all healthcare spending. H.R. 766 establishes a mechanism for the Congressional Budget Office to more accurately reflect the long-term cost-saving potential of preventing healthcare initiatives. This legislation works to produce an accurate understanding of the long-term savings that could be achieved from preventive health policies and to enable Congress to better evaluate meaningful and impactful healthcare policies. So once again, I want to thank the committee, thank the chairman, certainly thank members on my personal staff and the committee staff for helping get us to this point. I've just been delivered another letter of support that I'd ask unanimous consent be entered into the record from Dr. Brad Wenstrup, co-chair of the Congressional Doctors Caucus.
Without objection, so ordered.
With that, and I look forward to our continued work for the balance of this year. I know we've got a lot of stuff to do, but this is, thank you, I appreciate it. This is a big step, and the country will benefit long-term from this. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Texas and would encourage him not to suspend his principle. While he's still very much alive, his time in Congress will be expiring soon. So congratulations. With that, since there are no other amendments, I now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yocum, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 766, as amended, be reported to the House with the recommendation that the bill do pass.
The question is on favorably reporting the bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. If we don't have a request for recorded vote pursuant to the agreement,
I'll request it.
a recorded vote is requested pursuant to the agreement that I have reached with the ranking member, Mr. Boyle. We will postpone this recorded vote until later in the markup. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of H.R. 7032, the Congressional Budget Act Data Sharing Act, sponsored by the ranking member, authored by the ranking member, Mr. Boyle. This legislation expands and clarifies CBO's authority to request and receive data from the executive branch agencies. I ask unanimous consent that the first reading of the bill be dispensed with, the bill be considered as read and open to amendment at any point, and that the reading of any amendments be dispensed with without objection so ordered. Under the bipartisan agreement I've reached with Mr. Boyle, there'll be up to 10 minutes of debate on H.R. 7032. I now recognize my friend from Pennsylvania, our ranking member, Mr. Boyle, for 5 minutes to talk about his legislative reform.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. As said in my opening statement, I truly think this is a great day with the number of bills that we will be voting up on a bipartisan basis. And I thank you again as the lead co-sponsor of the CBO Data Sharing Act. Spoke also about this bill, not just in my opening statement today, but last week when we had Dr. Swagel in front of us. We need to help them do a better job in serving the institution of Congress. They have been faced with chronic delays from agency after government agency, whether the executive branch is controlled by a Republican in the White House or a Democrat in the White House. Indeed, I would remind everyone what Dr. Swagel said a week ago, that sometimes these agencies want to be more cooperative in sharing the data, but they feel hamstrung that they don't necessarily have the legal authority. So this is a common sense piece of legislation, again, a bipartisan bill that will strengthen CBO's responsiveness to all of us in Congress. It is just, frankly, it's just a matter of good common sense that if they are in good faith attempting to do the best job possible for Congress, and they're asking us for stronger tools in order to serve us better, then we need to do our job and make sure they have these tools. So I thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank, I was remiss in my opening statement, the one group of folks I forgot to thank are probably the most important, and that is I want to thank the staff on both the Democratic and Republican side who have been a great just a great asset in making sure that we have this bill and that we have a strategy to see it become law so it can make a difference. So thank you sincerely and heartfelt to staff on both sides who do such a great job for this committee. I'm personally very grateful. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member and yield myself 5 minutes. I'll be brief. I made most of my comments about my partner in this endeavor to fix what's broken about the process to the extent we can create better incentives. As Peter Drucker said, incentives drive behavior. That's life, that's business, and that's organizations of all kinds. And I appreciate his leadership on this, but more importantly, helping provide the tone, the constructive debate, the willingness to find common ground where we can. Where we can't, hey, both sides, when they don't have a willing partner, are obligated to do what they believe is right and good for this country. And I don't think anybody needs to make excuses or apologies for that. But thank you for the tone, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for leading this effort to provide common sense reforms, give CBO what they need, because the only way we can hold CBO accountable is, one, start providing real oversight. We only had our first oversight hearing in 6 years. That's not working, but they need the resources and tools to do their job as well. So I appreciate and am honored to support this and encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to also support this legislation. Since there are no other amendments, I now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yocum, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 7032 be reported to the House with the recommendation that the bill do pass.
Questions on favorably reporting the bill? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Request the recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to the agreement that I've reached with the ranking member. we will postpone this recorded vote until later in the markup. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of H.R. 5301. This is the last piece of process reform legislation, the Eliminate Useless Reports Act of 2023. With a name like that, who could not be in favor of this bill? The co-sponsor is our friend and colleague from Wisconsin, Senior Budget Committee member, Mr. Glenn Grothman, and supported by Representative Chuck Edwards, our friend from the Tar Heel State. I ask unanimous consent that the first reading of the bill be dispensed with, the bill be considered as read, and open amendment at any point. That the reading of any amendments be dispensed with without objection, so ordered. Under the bipartisan agreement, again, that I've reached with Mr. Boyle, there will be up to 10 minutes of debate on H.R. 5301. I now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman and our friend from Wisconsin, Mr. Glenn Grothman, to talk about his bill.
Thank you much for the generous time. Often when Congress passes laws that require various agencies to produce regular reports, while these reporting requirements can be helpful in tracking the progress of various efforts, they often become duplicative and outdated. The President's most recent budget request identified 53 reports that were outdated or duplicative. Some examples include the Department of Commerce report on business licensing, activities in Iraq. This report was signed into law in 2003. During the start of the Iraq wars, our presence there has diminished. The need for regular reports has outlived its usefulness. The Department of Labor report on a community college and career training grant. Again, this report is outdated. The authorization of appropriations has expired and no funds have been appropriated since 2014. An annual FTC report on the market concentration of the ethanol industry. The report has been submitted annually since 2005. Each and every year, the ethanol report, each and every year the ethanol market is not overly concentrated. Entry into the market is easy, and the present circumstances do not justify a presumption that a single ethanol producer could set prices. In short, there's no problem here that justifies the report. I'll also eliminate the Useless Reports Act of 2023 simply requires each agency to identify and recommend eliminating, modifying, or reducing the frequency of duplicative or outdated reports in its regular budget justification documents. This bill would increase the efficiency of identifying outdated or duplicative reports by providing a clear and comprehensive mechanism for their regular review and to seek a relevant committee's agreement to sunset or modify these reports. Recommendation from agencies would be considered by the relevant committee so they can take appropriate legislative steps. This bill would increase government efficiency by eliminating unnecessary reports, saving money. This bill was introduced on a bipartisan basis in the Senate by Senators Ossoff and Langford. Given the bipartisan and common sense nature of the bill, it was passed last December by unanimous request. I'm happy to co-lead this effort with my colleague Robert Garcia. I hope my colleagues on the Budget Committee can take a small but meaningful step towards bipartisanship and increasing the efficiency of the federal government by supporting this bill. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his leadership, and now yield 5 minutes to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will yield to Ms. Jackson Lee, my colleague from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member, and to the sponsors of this legislation, let me rise to support H.R. 5301 to Eliminate Useless Reports Act of 2023, and to thank the sponsors and the Senate sponsors. It is always important when we increase government efficiency by eliminating unnecessary federal agency reports, saving taxpayer dollars, and eliminating waste. These reforms are a process for federal agencies. It reforms a process for federal agencies to make recommendations about which congressionally mandated reports should be sunset, consolidated, or reduced in frequency, helping eliminate unnecessary federal spending. The Eliminate Useless Reports Act requires individual federal agencies to list their annual budget justification, any recurring reports, including government-wide and interagency reports they identify as outdated or duplicative, and to recommend whether to sunset, modify, consolidate, or reduce the frequency of these reports. This helps the American people. Under current law, this review is done through the Office of Management and Budget, coordinating an annual review of reports that may be outdated, duplicative. 53 such reports were identified within the President's 2024 budget request. H.R. 530 has a companion bill in the United States Senate, of which we hope will move forward. It was passed in the Senate through unanimous consent on December 18, 2023, and that bill is currently held at the desk. Ultimately, the goal of this bill is to increase government efficiency by eliminating unnecessary federal agency reports, saving taxpayer dollars, and eliminating waste, and providing the American people with the truth. With that, I ask my colleagues to support this legislation, and Mr. Ranking Member, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, and with the remaining 3 minutes, unless I see any other member who wants to be recognized, seeing none, happy to yield the time back, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I thank the ranking member and the gentlelady from the great state of Texas for her comments. And we have Chuck Edwards, our colleague from North Carolina, co-sponsor of this piece of legislation. I wanted to yield a few minutes to him for comments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's exciting to see that we may have a bipartisan effort here. I believe that most of us came to Washington, D.C. with the intent of eliminating some things. It seems like folks tend to pile legislation and rules on over and over. It's exciting to see we have a bipartisan effort to eliminate something, and duplicative reports seems to be a very common sense place to start. I very strongly support this bill, and I hope everyone else here will as well. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina, and I often say to my colleagues, while I have opinions on healthcare reform and tax reform and other policy reforms, I think oftentimes the central perverse incentive or brokenness, root cause of the problems is Congress that needs reform, and these are systemic reforms, I think, that will go a long way. So I thank you for your leadership, and now, since there are no other amendments, I recognize the gentleman again from Indiana, Mr. Yocum, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 5301 be reported to the House with the recommendation that the bill do pass.
The question is on favorably reporting the bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. H.R. 5301 is ordered, reported to the House with favorable recommendation. The committee will now vote on postponed recorded votes. First, the committee will vote to report on H.R. 766 as amended. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Norman. Aye. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. McClintock. Aye. Mr. McClintock, aye. Mr. Grothman. Aye. Mr. Grothman, aye. Mr. Smucker. Aye. Mr. Smucker, aye. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein. Mr. Good. Mr. Good, aye. Mr. Bergman. Aye. Mr. Bergman, aye. Mr. Ferguson. Yes. Mr. Ferguson, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy. Mr. Moore. Aye. Mr. Moore, aye. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Estes. Mr. Estes, aye. Ms. McLean. Ms. McLean. Ms. Fishbach. Ms. Fishbach. Mr. Yocum. Mr. Yocum, aye. Mr. Burkeen. Mr. Burkeen, aye. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, aye. Mr. Boyle. Mr. Boyle, aye. Ms. Schakowsky. Ms. Schakowsky, aye. Mr. Blumenauer. Mr. Blumenauer, aye. Mr. Kildee. Mr. Kildee, aye. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters. Miss Lee. Miss Lee. Mr. Doggett. Mr. Doggett, aye. Mr. Panetta. Mr. Panetta, aye. Miss Wexton. Miss Wexton. Miss Jackson Lee. Miss Jackson Lee. Miss Omar. Miss Omar, aye. Mr. Trone. Mr. Trone. Miss Ballant. Miss Ballant, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat, aye. Mr. Chairman.
Chairman's eye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Yes, sir. How is Representative Carter recorded?
Mr. Chair, the gentleman is not recorded. Mr. Carter, aye.
Clerk, how is Mr. Klein, Mr. Roy, and Mr. Valadeo, Ms. McLean, and Ms. Fishbach recorded?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Klein, Mr. Roy, Mr. Valadeo, Ms. McLean, and Ms. Fishbach are not recorded.
In that order, Mr. Klein?
Mr. Klein, aye.
Mr. Roy?
Well, since it's named after Dr. Burgess, I'll give you an aye.
Mr. Roy, aye.
Mr. Valadeo? Mr. McLean, Ms. McLean, and Mrs. Fishbach?
Ms. Fishbach, aye.
There, I think, may be some of our Democrat colleagues that have arrived. Mr. Peters, Ms. Lee, Ms. Wexton, Ms. Jackson Lee, and Mr. Trone, have they recorded?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Peters, Ms. Lee, Ms. Wexton, Ms. Jackson Lee, and Mr. Trone are not recorded.
How's Mr. Valadeo recorded again?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Valadeo is not recorded.
Mr. Val,
Mr. Valadeo, aye.
okay, that may have been the longest roll call in the history of the Budget Committee. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 766 as amended. Would you give us a final tally, Mr. Bailey? Mr. Bailey, how is Ms. McLean recorded before you get to that final tally?
Mr. Chair, Ms. McLean is not recorded. I say aye. Ms. McLean, aye.
I'd listen to her, Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Chair, the ayes are 30 and the noes are 0.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 766 as amended in order reported to the House with favorable recommendation. I note for the record that a quorum is present. Without objection, staff are authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. So ordered. The committee will now vote to report H.R. 7032. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Norman. Aye. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. McClintock. Aye. Mr. McClintock, aye. Mr. Grothman. Aye. Mr. Grothman, aye. Mr. Smucker. Aye. Mr. Smucker, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Carter. Aye. Mr. Carter, aye. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein, aye. Mr. Good. Mr. Good, aye. Mr. Bergman. Aye. Mr. Bergman, aye. Mr. Ferguson. Yes. Mr. Ferguson, aye. Mr. Roy. Aye. Mr. Roy, aye. Mr. Moore. Aye. Mr. Moore, aye. Mr. Valadeo. Aye. Mr. Valadeo, aye. Mr. Estes. Aye. Mr. Estes, aye. Ms. McLean. Aye. Ms. McLean, aye. Ms. Fishbach. Aye. Ms. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Yocum. Aye. Mr. Yocum, aye. Mr. Burkeen. Aye. Mr. Burkeen, aye. Mr. Edwards. Aye. Mr. Edwards, aye. Mr. Boyle. Aye. Mr. Boyle, aye. Ms. Schakowsky. Aye. Ms. Schakowsky, aye. Mr. Blumenauer. Mr. Blumenauer, aye. Mr. Kildee. Aye. Mr. Kildee, aye. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters, Miss Lee, Miss Lee, Mr. Doggett, Mr. Doggett, aye. Mr. Panetta, Mr. Panetta, aye. Miss Wexton, Miss Wexton, Miss Jackson Lee, Miss Jackson Lee, Miss Omar, Miss Omar, aye. Mr. Trone, Mr. Trone, Miss Ballant, Miss Ballant, aye. Mr. Scott, Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Espaillat, Mr. Espaillat, aye. Mr. Chairman,
Chairman's a yes.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Are there any members who wish to vote or change their vote? I don't think so, so clerk, give us a final tally.
Mr. Chair, on the vote, the ayes are 30 and the noes are 0.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to on the ranking member's legislation. H.R. 7030 is ordered, reported to the House with favorable recommendation. I'm just going to wrap up by saying again, thank you, Ranking Member Boyle, and I think you have something you want to add?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, before I again offer my thanks to you, I do just need a little bit of housekeeping. I request the requisite number of days to submit my minority views.
Without objection, so ordered. Anything else you'd like to say on your birthday since you?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the best birthday gift of all, and thank all the members on both sides of the committee for voting out the legislation that I have with you, Mr. Chair, the CBO Data Sharing Act, and I also congratulate again Mr. Burgess. It shows you that we can do good bipartisan work in this committee that can truly make a difference here, and very proud to work with you in this endeavor. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Feelings are mutual. With that, the committee stands adjourned.
All right.
Well done.
Thank you.
I couldn't have said it any better.